Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, we've heard a lot about identity, the certain types of players the Suns want to have, and we know it might just be Devin Booker and not much else sticking around on this roster. So what is the best way to build around Devin Booker, not only next season, but long-term to get back to contention with him as the best guy? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into Locked On Phoenix Suns. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing and a credentialed Suns media member. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Wednesday. Don't forget Locked On Suns, free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Just click that follow or subscribe button. Do what thousands of other Suns fans have already done. Become an everydayer and get locked on to the Phoenix Suns right here each and every day. Today's episode brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA when you do to get $20 off your first purchase. Does Ishbia's identity fit the best identity around Book? What does that mean for the summer and much more? Joining me to break it all down from the Wild West Valley, my fellow Suns credentialed media member. How are we feeling on this Wednesday, Ben Garcia?
So good, because we're going to talk about what the best way is to build around Booker and how that fits in the next version of the Phoenix Suns. And you know what, Brendon? A trusted source told me Giannis Antetokounmpo, a perfect fit, coming to the Phoenix Suns. So can we just start right there that he's a perfect fit? We'll have him here, Booker, and
we're going to spend
Giannis
30 minutes breaking down that very, very reliable news report on X.com about how Giannis is headed to the Valley. No,
dude, some people believe that. Some people believe that garbage. I feel bad.
A guy
for
who
those
is
people.
Still actively in a playoff series. I don't think he has a list, probably quite yet. Let's get to it though, because there is a lot here, and we'll just start off 30,000 feet. I think here, Ben. What is the best way to build around Devin Booker? Right, we've seen him in a lot of contexts throughout his NBA career. He's a 19-year-old coming off the bench. Then he's this developing combo guard who is sort of just piling up stats and people don't think he's a winning player. Then all of a sudden, holy crap, he's in the finals as an off guard next to a legendary point guard. And then he's kind of been back to this combo guard thing with this big three here. Then that's not to mention all the other context of the roster. That's just who are the best players that he's on a team with. So if you were to just sum it up here going into year 11 for Book, what do you think is the ideal context for Book to be at his best and for the team to be at its best with?
Well, what's kind of easy about this, obviously, it's very hard to assemble this kind of team, but we did kind of see what works already with Devin Booker. I do think two lengthy 3-and-D players that are not beholden to getting their own need to be something like, and I'm not talking about championship contender, because I think a championship contender around Book is different, and we're not there at least for the foreseeable future. Maybe that changes the next couple seasons, but just a competitive team around Booker. He can be your one. Doesn't mean you're going to win a title, but he can be your one and get you into the playoffs. And it's got to be lengthy 3-and-D guys. Like, I hate to bring up Cam and Mikal, but those were the type of guys that did work well with Devin Booker. Guys that could shoot the three. Crowder as well worked very well with Booker. Guy that he can drive into the basket, kick it open to the open man, whether it's Crowder, Johnson, Mikal, like those guys worked. And then outside of those three guys, I guess I should say, but that type of thing, being the foundation of the Suns, you need a point guard, but not someone who's always just needs to take the ball up to be effective. Someone that can help like decipher defenses, but Booker is better with the ball in his hands. Doesn't mean he needs to bring it up on every play, but someone that can handle the ball, again, a little bit more feistier, kind of similar to the Chris Paul thing where like Chris Paul was still a pretty decent defender, but ultimately what it is like Devin Booker's never going to be as bad as Luka Doncic defensively, but you need to surround him with tough, lengthy 3-and-D guys, and even more so in the point guard position as well. And then as well, I would love to see a rim runner with Booker. It's why I'm so adamant about a Derek Lively trade potentially coming down the works for Kevin Durant or whatever that looks like. But a rim running guy that with more upside and potential than Nick Richards has, I want to see Devin Booker back with that guy.
So just
Ayton
the
was always good with
2021
that.
team?
No, I mean, I don't think exactly
'Cause
the
you're-
2021 team.
Well,
because
then what would you say should be better? Because I mean, that team came up short, and
that
I
team
would
came up
push.
short.
I would say too that a couple things about that team make feel like a little bit of a bygone era to me. One is they were as they got hit with right away in that final series, too small, right?
Yep.
Like even wings like Cam McHale, obviously Crowder's undersized, we know that, but even those two, not quite physically big and
No.
strong enough,
Especially
especially as the
McHale.
league has progressed in that direction more and more. And I would say, can you win with I know Chris Paul is a very unique aberration in terms of size and skill set in the history of the NBA, but I'm not sure I don't know if it's really a point guard or if it's maybe more of like a hybrid kind of playmaker. That would be a question for me. And
Rubio
I also
worked.
Well, yeah, to get to 40 wins,
Well,
35
I'm not-
wins.
Like, we can talk about what building around a team looks like for Devin Booker for a championship contender, but that's why I kind of picked my words carefully, where it was, I'm not really looking to build a championship contender because that's a different team. Booker can't be the one on that team. Booker's got to be a 2. But
Yeah.
a team can be fielded next year and be a playoff threat, a rim running guy.
Okay. Yeah.
3 and D
Well, I guess
players,
we're kind of
and a
having a
combo
different
guard.
conversation then, because I'm thinking if I'm saying ideal, we're in fantasy land right now. You know what I mean? And so to me, I'm trying to think pick 29 this year. Core piece of the Durant trade. Blue chip scrap heap minimum free agent a la Bol Bol or something that they go out and try to get this summer. What are the tent pole, the archetypes of the kinds of pieces that I want next to Booker? You're maybe not going to nail it. You don't get all those guys in one offseason, or it might not be what the ideal Fantasyland version is. But the last thing I would say is the center part, and that was going to be the other stuff. I'm just kind of being, for the sake of conversation.
Yeah.
The center part is where I disagree with you, I think, the most. I don't think that I would be 100% certain that a rim running big is actually the best thing to do with Devin Booker because offensively, because what we've seen is that take out the Suns, who didn't even win the championship, the past 5 championship winning centers have been Anthony Davis in 2020, Brook Lopez 2021, Draymond Green 2022, Nikola Jokic, and Kristaps Porzingis. None of those guys are traditional DeAndre Jordan pick and roll, high screen and roll big men. Now, you need rim protection, you need size, you need rebounding. There's plenty of teams and players in the league that are succeeding that way right now. Jared Allen's at the top of the East. Whoever you want to point to, Lively, who was in the finals last year. Obviously, Zubats is kind of a traditional guy, like Gobert. Those are all out there still. But I would love, and I would think of it as a really high priority to rebuild this roster to get a spacing center. We've never really seen it next to Book, which is part of the problem of trying to say that it's necessary. But
Bender.
What we have seen, Bender, what we have seen is that when he plays with small ball lineups, and those are, the Suns have never been able to piece one together that really works, but the Wolves series last year at times and other spots, he is an absolute problem when he has that much space to work with. And the Suns at least need that as an option going forward because all the best teams have it.
Sounds like you're rooting for let me say this first. Yeah, sounds like you're rooting for a Knicks trade that brings Karl Anthony Towns to the Suns. Because that's not a traditional
somebody like Towns who maybe isn't already 30 and making $50 million, but yeah, I mean, I think.
Well, if that's what we're talking about, if that's what we're talking about in your end, and I'm having this for the sake of conversation's sake, just like you were with me, it's that is the most attainable guy. Like, and not only in that retrospect, but how in the world, even in fantasy land, would you get AD or Nikola Jokic? Like, Karl-Anthony Towns is the closest player to that.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to be, of course, an all NBA version of that, but I think that you look
Kristaps?
at Miles Turner, you look at where Isaiah Stewart, even in Detroit, is their option in that type of way. I would even say like both Thunder centers are pretty. I know Hartenstein's a little bit more traditional, but he can pass. He can make the kind of mid-range jumper a little bit. He's a perimeter guy on the defensive end. Naz Reid. I think that it doesn't have to be your starter. It doesn't have to be a max dude that's a superstar, but a spacing player. Otherwise, I agree with everything you're saying. You need another playmaker next to Book. I think we've learned he can't be the sole playmaker. And of course, every team in the league needs 3-and-D wings. But the one difference from that 2021 team that I would definitely say is less Ayton and more of those types of centers, at least as an option.
Well, I don't think that's necessarily wrong either, but I'll take it a step further. And this is what I was going to say after the Cat gotcha argument. And that was, if we're building a team that's to win a championship, you're not building it around Booker. I don't think it's possible. I think there's foundational piece. I think he can be a foundational piece in that. But I think what's been true is Booker's not a number one. He's at his best, in my opinion, the best two in the league. And I don't think you see a lot of guards, 6'5", not named Stephen Curry and incredibly athletic. Like, I know people like to say, oh, 6'5". Well, Anthony Edwards is 6'6", 6'7". Like, Devin Booker's right there. Well, first off, there's just a much bigger difference between those two guys. And I just think if you're not Steph Curry, it's probably hard to just dominate this league being at that size. So if we're talking about that kind of team, you do have to find that second star that can be a 1A, 1B swap in and out each and every night for Devin Booker. But what you say is interesting, but you bring up like Kristaps Porzingis is on the. I can bring up caveats to each of those guys. Kristaps Porzingis is on a team that has virtually no weaknesses, so that makes it a little bit easier to point him out and say, "Oh, he's that guy." Anthony Davis is
it's
a
not about
star.
being good.
Nikola Jokic.
I don't care if they're good. My point
You just
is
want them to fit the archetype.
style of player of what it allows your offense to do to have the space for Booker to maximize the in-between game and the methodical kind of scoring and playmaking that we know he's best at. It's not about Porzingis. Of course, he's a unicorn. It's about the fact that when he's out there, he stands behind the three-point line and he protects the rim. His name could be John Smith, and I would be pointing him out as an example of what I'm saying. It's really not about Porzingis. It's just the type of player.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Then, what player could you think of just to give me an idea? That's not Cat. Like, he's just a.
I just gave you 100. I said Isaiah Stewart. I said
Isaiah Stewart.
Naz Reid. I said, Miles Turner.
Yeah, you did.
The best teams have them. All of the best teams have options like that. Şengün, frankly, is he is a little more of a star. He's an all-star, but he's that. So that's where I would look. And I would agree with your point on the star. I think it's obviously big to hit that because even in the 2021 team, yes, Booker was the top scorer, but in terms of breaking down the defense, Chris Paul was the primary initiator of the Suns' offense. That offense doesn't work unless Chris Paul is there, and Book played off of that. So you still are probably going to need that because Book has not risen to the level of being an elite offensive orchestrator to be the lead dog on the best of the best offenses. He just isn't that, but he can be part of a puzzle of getting there. Let's get to the identity that Ishbia said. Does that actually fit with what we're talking about here? Next. First, today's show is brought to you by Car Gurus. Shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting. But between the confusing prices and hidden fees, it can feel very overwhelming. But that's why we here love using Car Gurus, because they help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, Car Gurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the United States. They verified dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data you need to make the right price, make the right choice without second guessing yourself. Here's the deal. I had the unfortunate luck of having to buy a car when the market was an absolute nightmare. But even then, these types of platforms are really the best place to go because they're not having you negotiate with a jerk in a dealership. We know how much of a nightmare that can be, but they're also pretty reasonable and down the middle. They give you trends on their prices. They can allow you to compare and contrast different options, and they really just want to get the car sold. They're not trying to nickel and dime you and all the types of things you often have to deal with. So buy or sell your next car today with Car Gurus at cargurus.com. Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's cargurus.com, cargurus.com. Today's show also brought to you by Wayfair, who I've told you before is the clutchest place to buy anything you need for your home. Spring is here, and that is what makes it home project season. Whether you're refreshing a room or tackling a full renovation, Wayfair is the best kept secret for all things home improvement. From small updates like cabinet hardware to major upgrades like a new vanity, sink, or outdoor lighting setup, Wayfair has quality products for every budget. I've already told you that I am getting ready to move to a different place. The desk might have to be out in the open and everybody has to hear me shout about the Suns in the middle of the living room, but we're looking at a little room separator, like a rollout hospital style. I know that makes it sound bad, but it's the perfect kind of comp just to throw up a little decoration behind me and at least have some privacy. It's the kind of little thing Wayfair always seems to have on stock that the other places don't. So go to wayfair.com. It makes home improvement easy. That's WAYFAIR.com. Get started with Wayfair. Every style, every home. All right, Ben, let's keep it rolling here. So we heard a lot from Mat Ishbia at the press conference a couple of weeks ago about identity, about this exact type of question. He wasn't necessarily being so nitty-gritty about it, and it wasn't so focused on Book, but his answer, Ben, was a lot of defense and grit and all this sort of stuff. And a part of me thinks, was that the answer because that's actually just the only type of identity that we really can think of when we use that type of word? Maybe. But I worry that a team too focused on defense actually might set Booker up to fail because it asks too much of him on offense. You've said this before. You got to build around the identity of your best player. Devin Booker's not any kind of stopper, so you got to have a lot of offense to make him look his best too.
Well, also, man, outside of the Celtics, who are an absolute juggernaut, like the couple of teams that I can think of off the top of my head that are like, you know, muck up games, make it look dirty. I can think of the Cavs who do this right now. Probably not title contenders, obviously, right now. The Knicks, not really title contenders, kind of do the same thing. The Pacers kind of do this sort of same thing. I agree with you. I do think the best way to build a team is off what your best player does well. That doesn't mean you can't have players that supplement the things that he doesn't do well, but you should maximize what your best player does well, because then you have an issue like with the Bucks right now, where if Giannis Antetokounmpo doesn't have a triple-double, quadruple-double, they don't beat teams in the playoffs. And so that's where I would go with that. I totally agree with you. I do think Booker, like, you're so right. You hit the nail on the head with, like, there's like a couple of teams that, like, when you think of like, oh yeah, that style of play. I do think Booker can fit in a defensive culture, but it needs to be supplemented by guys that can hit shots. And there's a lot of guys out there that do both of those things well. I do think Booker fits that because he is the culture here. And so it just goes back to, I don't know what exactly Mat Ishbia even thinks at this point, because we got told things 2 weeks ago that aren't the same now. So like you and I are just assuming that's what he meant, but we don't really have a clear vision. If that's what he's going with, I think it would work, but you need to base what you do well off of what your best player does well to maximize him, get the absolute best out of him.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to the point that I was making about that. I know it can sound like maybe not that huge of a difference with the center conversation that we were having in that last segment, but to me, it really is a big difference because there were things that DeAndre Ayton did well on the offensive end, or even you could say Yusuf Nurkic did well on the offensive end with their offensive rebounding. Both guys could kind of had a decent feel as dribble handoff playmakers. And obviously Ayton was a great finisher most of the time and, could occasionally create an isolation, mostly with his mid-range jumper. But none of that is maximizing you as an offensive team. The best offensive teams in the NBA, they have those types of spacing bigs, at least in their back pocket, even if that's not their starter. And so that's kind of what I mean when I make that point. And I don't want to say that defense is the only type of identity or those type of hard-nosed guys that Ishbia was talking about. Like that's it, and he's just kind of taking the easy way out on that answer. Like I would say the Warriors have an identity with their motion offense that's very unique. There's teams where the identity is their best player is kind of their whole identity, like the Lakers now with Luka or the Nuggets with Jokic. There's teams where just kind of like the collective energy and physicality is the identity. The
Boston.
Rockets, the Wolves kind of feel like that. Sure, Boston. So there's a lot of ways to kind of to do it, but I don't know if a lot of that sounds like what I would think of as a Devin Booker identity. I almost feel like a Devin Booker identity, even with that 2021 team, it's almost kind of an IQ and chemistry type of identity would probably be how I would define those Suns teams 5 years or so ago when they were at their peak. I know Chris Paul
Chemistry
and Monty
for
Williams
sure.
had a lot to do with that, but it was like, we're going to be prepared, we're going to execute, we're going to be on a string on both ends, and we're going to have kind of a togetherness that's going to get us past some teams that might be more talented or teams that might be bigger or whatever the case may be. That's probably, it's kind of vague, but that's probably what I would say.
Well, I'd agree. Well, the 2021 team, I think one key thing you missed in that is I think it's very similar to what the Cavs have now. It's like when we get up on you, we're just going to stomp you. Like we're going to beat you by 40 points or you're
Like
going to
a
knock us in the face. Yeah, yes, the tenacity, the pin your ears back, and just when you're up 10, 15 points, you're not coming back. The problem with that team was the physicality, which was like when we push you around, like you can be pushed around, is what I would say, and like that, and like
they
you
were
bring up
just
a good point.
undersized. I mean, I don't know
Yeah,
if they
like
didn't fight,
McHale-
right? It's just like, what are guys supposed to do? What's Campaign supposed to do when he gets switched on to Luka in that game 7?
Well,
It's Campaign. You know,
Well, also, like, just forget Campaign. Like, let's talk about Mikal Bridges. There's this idea that bringing him back is like, oh, he's a defensive stopper. Well, he's actually not the same guy defensively as it seems like he was. And in the playoffs, he couldn't guard Brandon Ingram, so he had to go guard CJ McCollum. LeBron James toyed with him. Luka Doncic toyed with him. Paul George at times kind of toyed with him. And then in the finals, he wouldn't make a difference. They lost that series. In fact, he was one of the ones that said, "Oh, we're up 2-0. We're going to beat this team."
for sure.
No, hell no. He can't guard no Giannis. In fact, at times it's when you said Mikal or when you said they were too small, I was like, Mikal was like one of the biggest issues with that because he's thin. So
yeah, and I think the other thing too is like not even just small, but they weren't athletic. They weren't a very athletic team outside of.
You want to know what the response was to that too? It was going and getting JaVale McGee. When we knew we had an issue with the front court, they went and responded with JaVale McGee.
What are you supposed to do with when your team has a starting 5? Like, I mean, what are you gonna?
And did go to the finals.
I get it.
But that was one of the things. Like we knew something had to change, but we didn't change it then. We changed it a little bit later, and it was too late when you went and played the Mavs.
Yeah, for sure. So, I think it's not to say that Ishbia is crazy or off base. I get what he wants. Of course, in terms of, speaking to the fans and wanting to have a pride in the product on the court and the players on the roster. I think all those things do matter, and the Suns have a freaking award named after it. So that shows you that obviously with this fan base, the Dan Marley thing, it does matter. Like, those guys are always the fan favorites, and the Suns do have a cool history of a lot of those types of players. But in terms of the best thing around Book, like, I think of those Olympics teams and the 2021 team, and it's that collective IQ, that togetherness, being better than the sum of their parts, and he can kind of be the scoring thing that elevates you over the top of it. So with that all said, the Suns have a lot of guys who are under contract next season. We know the biggest names are probably on the move, but what is this whole thing going to look like to get a little closer to that and probably a little younger and reset this whole thing in a direction that makes sense? Next. First today's show is brought to you by Gametime. There's nothing like the atmosphere of an NBA playoff game. Every bucket, every defensive stop, every moment feels huge. It's electric in the arena, and with Gametime, you can be part of it without the stress of last-minute ticket hunting. Okay, maybe you don't live in a market where there's NBA playoff games, because Gametime is kind of bullying us, as I told you before with this ad read. We don't get that here in Phoenix, but there's baseball. There is concerts. There is college sports before long. There's tons. Comedy, even. Theater, whatever you love, Gametime has it. Last-minute deals, all-in pricing, cuts the nonsense, cuts the hassle, cuts the overwhelming burden on your pocket out of the whole process, and Gametime gets it done. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, closing out the show here. I look at this roster, Ben, after this conversation, and it's no secret they just finished 36-46 precisely because they did not look a lot like the type of team we've been imagining in this episode. I don't see a lot of players who fit the type of identity that we're talking about.
Do you see one?
Like Ryan Dunn.
Yes. The other one I would say is Colin Gillespie, not because he's this shutdown guy, but we know every team needs that guy that comes off the bench and just plays with a ton of energy and gets after the opposing team. But like, yeah, man, I have the roster up in front of me too. I don't know. I mean, like Royce O'Neal 5 years ago, maybe. Even Oso, man. I mean, he's 1 year in, but no. Grayson, no. Like we were just talking about, what some of the changes we'd want to see. If we're talking about that kind of team that Ishbia wants, which we're just kind of spitballing because he never laid it out to us perfectly, it's done. You're not moving on from Booker, and I think just Colin Gillespie. Because like even Royce O'Neal is not that same guy anymore. Grayson, I think
people would probably say Oso, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I think there's a valid question there on if his offensive game ever comes around enough to be able to be on the court in a playoff series. But at the same time, he is about to be 23 and very raw. It's not as if we know the answer. So I think most of us still expect him to be back, but I don't think you could say you're sure that anyone probably besides Dunn is like a clear-cut lock to be a fit in like the type of NBA playoff basketball that we're watching on a nightly basis right now in April and May. So I would say that's probably where the list ends for me too. If I'm kind of thinking about like the bigger picture questions for the Suns, like I think that's a big part of why it's so urgent to just get Beal off this team, because I absolutely don't think that he's part of that, and you're just belaboring. I understand there's good reasons to belabor it with the contract, but that's one thing Ishbia has been pretty concrete about, is that if you don't play and act like the type of player he wants to have on this roster, you're gone. That was his answer about Beal. Like that's been the most direct thing we've heard in terms of actually spelling this whole thing out. As far as the KD trade goes, like, I think you and I have already sort of gravitated toward the trades that get them closer to this type of a build. But the one thing I would say, just to be specific, is that's why the Miami package, if they ever get involved here with Kel'el Ware, is so tantalizing to me because again, to keep the center thing as my big emphasis here, he is exactly what I'm talking about.
That is the one that changes. Like, we don't have to turn into like a Kevin Durant thing, but it's like, I agree with you where that is the one. That's the wild card where I'm like, yeah, just make that one happen. Like, just whatever picks you can get. Where, I don't know. I doubt you can get Hawkes in it too, but like, when I say that, people are like, oh, Hawkes, like his value is not as high anymore. But just to continue off that point is like, you and I have been on this for a little bit where we've talked about the teams that make the most sense for the Suns and what players they have. We say, every time I bring up the Timberwolves, we say Jay McDaniels. And it's not just because of his contract. It's because that's what fits with the Suns. The Knicks, we're talking Mikal Bridges or OG Anunoby. And then with the Rockets, we're talking Jabari Smith and probably just Jabari Smith and then Eason and then a salary cap filler. But that doesn't matter. We're always talking about that kind of player because the Suns are starved of those players. So, you know, man, I look at this roster too, just so like we're being like, there's not a single guy on here outside of like Dunn, Oso, Booker, that if they were not here next year, I wouldn't bat an eye. Like I wouldn't be upset at all. Like obviously the Kevin Durant thing, like that sucks because you want to have Kevin Durant on your team, but like it's not working. Beal, no. Like even if Bol just walked out the door, like I want him here. There's no one on this team outside of maybe Gillespie too. That's where it ends for me.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up one last thing because I agree, and I think we've been pretty good about prioritizing the types of trades for KD, like you said, that bring these types of guys back. So I think we've made all that clear. But the last thing that we haven't brought up is there's been this conversation online in NBA, you know, kind of content creator people recently that was started by Owen Phillips, this guy who writes a newsletter. I'm not subscribed. I don't always get to read it, but he posted a bunch of content from it on Twitter this week. He used to work in NBA front offices, and now he's kind of doing some content while he looks for his next job. He wrote this piece called "The NBA Enters Its Weak Link Era" that I thought was really interesting. And it really illustrates, I think, why the Suns roster has been why I think especially they've been susceptible to just getting pummeled in some of these games is because their worst players are so easy to pick on. And not just because of the quality of the players, but more so the types of players. And one thing I really want to see next year is, I know we talked about how the Suns needed a point guard, and so they went out and they tried to triple down on that. But when you just look at even this year's roster, I'm not saying anything new, but it can't happen again. Tyus, Book, Grayson, Beal, Monte, Gillespie, Ty, all guards, all guys who wanted to play, who are all small, not super athletic guards. You have fairly limited center options like Oso and Plumlee and Richards. One-way players, fairly not super versatile, very easy to pick apart if you're an opposing coach making up a game plan. There were just so few players who were legit two-way guys who can kind of move around in their role and their position on a team. And that's what the whole NBA is. So obviously it's easy to say, well, build a roster like the Thunder. But I think that article from him really puts it in a better way of you can't have too many really bad weak links on your roster or you're just going to get absolutely killed in the NBA these days. And we can go through the teams that are good right now. I feel like I do that too much, but if you just think of them, they don't have those types of weak links.
Well, look at all the teams that are going to advance or are in a competitive series right now. The Knicks, they've got dudes everywhere. They don't got a lot of weak links there. Now they have trouble scoring the basketball, but luckily they're playing a team that also has that issue. You look at the Pacers, they don't have that either. Like Mathurin's like their seventh guy off the bench, and he's a viable piece for them. So the Suns don't have that. Like if you're talking about two-way players, the Suns had one of those guys, Kevin Durant. Ryan Dunn wasn't a two-way player last year consistently. Booker defensively took a massive step back. They had one guy, 36-year-old Kevin Durant, who was still really good defensively, but that was their only player. So you're right, man. Got to get bigger. Get rid of all the guards. And like, if you are going to have
and just on the end of the bench, take chances on guys who have upside to be modern players that contribute.
That's what I was going to say.
There's no need, like Damian Lee. What are we doing? I get it. I
Well-
understand that like there's locker room guys and there's everything
Yeah.
else, but in the next iteration of this team where you're really desperate to hit on the small stuff, you gotta be more purposeful about the players you target in those spots. And like, I know people laugh sometimes when I know I was joking with like you and Shane at games where I'd be like Jalen Bridges a bunch, or like people would laugh at me last summer because I was big on the guy from San Antonio, Sandru Mamukelashvili. Like, he's a center that was out on the market. The Spurs just get him back on a minimum for nothing. He had that huge game down the stretch last season where he went for like 30, and he's not even getting minutes for the Spurs. You can steal players like that. I would rather try that and give Jalen Bridges some minutes and things like that over, Mason Plumlee and some of those types of players. Like, think more creatively about what the upside's actually going to be rather than just, we need a center, so we got a center. Okay, we need a guard, so okay, guard. Like, it has to be different because the best teams are doing that.
I would agree with you. And my whole thing is, even if you say you are going to have a little too many guys the size of Ty Washington, just make sure they're all Colin Gillespie type players, where at least they're going to try to do all the gritty stuff and try not to get bullied all the time. I don't want that to be a roster, but I'm thinking of like Jordan Goodwin or Colin Gillespie, like those type of players that are just gritty, do all the little things type of guys, glue guys, where maybe they're not the biggest dudes, but they're not going to make it easy for them to just push you over. Where the Suns had 8 of those guys on this roster that consistently played, that were those types of players that just got pushed around.
I do want to shout out one more two-way player. I think Royce O'Neal deserves some.
I mentioned him, man. I don't know how much of a two-way player he was this year. I was when I was going
like
down
45% from three. He's not an elite.
Well,
defender,
yeah,
but
from
he's a
30.
rotation player.
Listen. Royce O'Neal from offense is not what I was worried about. He was a capable offensive player. He wasn't he tried on defense, but he wasn't what he used to be in Utah or even with the Nets. He wasn't the same guy.
If you compare him to his old standard, yeah. But I'm just saying, if we're talking about guys where I probably wouldn't hate it if he's on the roster next year. If you can get something back for him, then okay. But if he was on the roster next year, I would feel like, okay, like he can contribute to the type of new identity of this roster that we're talking about, and it wouldn't be a black hole or some kind of disaster. So, and he's only 32. He's going to turn 32 this year, so he's not even that old. So he could be one, but yeah, it's a lot more guys like that and a lot less of the limited centers and guards who have been, unfortunately, far too common here lately. All right, good conversation. I thought it's good to get that one on the record now so we can kind of think back to it, and you guys can make fun of us if we sound like idiots.
Propaganda.
And they
Propaganda.
go all in on defense and they shock the world and they're a 5 seed next year. Then we can laugh at ourselves and say, wow, we really thought they should be more of an offensive team. How dumb were we? Or whatever it ends up looking like. But enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. Hit follow or subscribe if you have not already. Become an everydayer. We got content for you. Even though it is the off season, it's coming constantly. I mean, there's so much news. So where else are you going to get it? Keep it right here. We'll talk to you next time.